what the program is. And it's becoming quite obvious what the program is to those who look at it at all, particularly in the Columbine operation. This resulted in passing legislation on gun control, which had been stymied for a long period of time. And that operation was massive. I won't go into it because that's a totally different story, but it's one of many. This is only one aspect. Somebody is running a program to control the thrust of legislation. This is one possibility, and there's actually one reality. The Montauk Boys can be used for a lot of other things. One can look around and one can see it. You might note that in the whole operation of these school shootings, whether it be Conyers, Columbine, or whatever, no one ever suggests that these kids have been under some form of mind control. This is a totally verboten subject. They will not approach it. They will not admit to it. They will not even consider it. This is one aspect of what I would like to get public. This Montauk Boys program is very subversive. It is very invasive. It intrudes in many areas of our society in a very unobvious manner, but it's very real. Those who are manipulating it, we cannot really point out and say, you, or you're running this program, or you're doing this. There are many levels involved in terms of this mind manipulation as to who is responsible and what the ultimate agenda is. I could go on this for a very long period of time because one can surmise where some of it is coming from. And I might add, from my experience, I don't think all of it is directed from our legislative bodies or the secret governments on the face of the earth. I do feel that some of it comes in the agenda, and the ultimate agenda comes from off-planet. But that is my feeling, and my stated feeling. I cannot prove it. Before I close out totally on the subject of the Montauk Boys, I might add that much of the information I have garnered, of course, is my recall of what I was involved in after I became aware of my connection with the Montauk Project and the many phases of it. Further research since that point, in terms of what's going on with the Montauk Boys, I think you will find interesting. What they went through at that time, 76 to 83, and for quite some years after, because while Montauk Point was closed down, the programs were not. The Montauk Boys program continued to this day at various locations. If you have psychic sensitivity and can see auras, or if you are good in reading body language, a Montauk Boy in phase 1, of course we call the initial phase, not the physical, that was perhaps 1A, whatever. Phase 1 in terms of electronic processing, the one-on-one pad business, continued for many years. And this produced a product, if I may use that term, which was rather obvious. Anyone, even without body language or without psychic sensitivity, could detect that these victims, in many cases, didn't act entirely normal. They lacked spontaneity. They sometimes were a little jerky in emotions and so forth, depending on how severely they've been hit. Anyone who could read auras could see immediately this person had been processed through the Montauk Boys Project, if they knew what it was about. But they would see in the outer aura a jagged black outline. It's just like let's say a fairly wide pen or a narrow paintbrush would paint a jagged line around the entire aura. A person who could read body language would see, because of what the body language says, that I have been programmed, I'm not normal. This is very obvious to a person who can read body language. This system, this approach, went on for quite a number of years, and I would estimate about 1995, it went into phase 2. It was refined in terms of the electronics. They were much less obvious in normal daily life. The outline in the aura was much smoother and less obvious, and the body language was not as easy to read. About December of 1997, while I was in Denver, I was in Denver in 1997, from August to December, I started to note an influx of a new type of Montauk Boy, and I also noted something else. It was approaching saturation of young people, because it became a case not of trying to find a Montauk Boy among the boys running around the town, but trying to find somebody who was not a Montauk Boy. This is what the situation is now, and virtually all young people who run through the program, it's at least 90%. Those who are unfit, of course, physically or mentally, and they are dropped out. But those who are run through the new program, there's no longer one-on-one pads, there's no EEG machines or anything similar. But the new program is now on a totally new approach. Speaking in terms of electronics and electronic manipulation of the mind, they now have a technique using RF microwave energy with the proper modulations. They produce a scalar wave wherein if they pick a group of candidates who fit the same general categories of what they want, have the same general physical characteristics, mental characteristics, traits, whatever, and they want to put out, let's say, 30 people into one particular program, they put them in this room and now batch process them. The RF energies will impinge on everyone's brain simultaneously. No longer are you concerned about the chakras and approaching it through a chakra system, but you impinge it on through the brain into the conscious and the subconscious. And in a fairly short period of time, I've never witnessed this program, but I would make an estimate of about 30 minutes max. They have been fully programmed. It's all through in the subconscious. And they've done some 20 or 30 people all at once. They go out the door and they're Montauk boys, but very undetectable. The new system is very smooth. It leaves almost no mark on the aura, and body language is very difficult to read. And in terms of an ordinary person observing somebody else, there's hardly any evidence of a lack of spontaneity or any evidence of a change in that person's normal characteristics or behavior. This is the ongoing program as it is now, and this is where the numbers come in of at least 10 million Montauk boys in the U.S. Nothing like this around the world, but having been in Switzerland and in Australia, I've seen them there, but they are very limited in numbers. I would say not over 10%, perhaps not over 5%, if that much. But in the U.S. today, it's approaching 90%. The programming now includes girls because no longer are you concerned about the chakra polarities, and no longer are you concerned about approaching it with a pad or the electronic machine, but you do it with an RF system. You impinge directly on the brain. It doesn't matter whether they're male or female. You can impinge the same program through a male or a female, and now Montauk girls are showing up in larger numbers. And I might add, one of their primary functions is to keep a Montauk boy happy in the very physical sense. The sex between the male and the female will lock in the program that boy has received or the girl has even deeper. That was the major problem with the homosexual approach, is they would deprogram themselves. This is not wanted. But with a male-female relationship, it locks in the program, so if somebody is particularly important, and I know of at least one friend of mine who's in this category, who's been programmed, he had a girlfriend who was a Montauk girl, who was to keep him in line and see he would do certain things. She's no longer with him. He married her. That broke up. He's remarried to someone much better, I'm happy to say. But this is a wrinkle on the program. There's an even more additional wrinkle, shall we say, to this program now. They've branched out. In the matter of the Columbine operation, and before that, of course, one of the things that showed up was a group called the Trenchcoat Mafia. Now, this term actually came out of Eric's mouth and also Dylan's mouth. They consider themselves members of the Trenchcoat Mafia. Others showed up at the site, which is not publicly reported. And I might add, my number 2 son considered himself a member of the Trenchcoat Mafia, and he had personally admitted that he was in a government employ as an assassin. This is one of the things they use the Montauk boys for. And I'm not happy to say he was my number 2 son. I won't go into how I found out he was, but I did. And this whole operation of Trenchcoat Mafia can be traced to an Air Force base now closed upstate New York. The same air base where Eric Harris's father in the Air Force came from and was stationed with his family for many years. Now, what are the Trenchcoat Mafia, if I may explore this slightly? They are considered an offshoot of the whole Montauk Boys program, which is specifically, shall we say, guardedly, religiously oriented. They're Satanists. The whole 9 yards of the Trenchcoat Mafia are Satanists and Satan worshippers, as was Eric and Dylan, which was never made public, and they have taken great care not to make that public. This whole group is considered of satanic relationship and origin. If you remember in the public discourse, the videos and everything that was shown on TV, and a little bit they showed about the diaries. One of the things that happened in the shooting in the library, and it was noted in the public press, when Eric or Dylan, doesn't matter which one it was, went up to one of the girls, grabbed her around the neck essentially, and pointed the gun at her head, and says, "Do you believe in God?" This one particular girl said yes. Bang, shot dead. If she had said no, she would have lived. This was, among other things, a satanic operation in terms of the orientation of the boys being used. This is not good news, and I'm sure it doesn't sit pleasantly with a lot of people, but I wish to implore you to examine the facts and do it for yourself. There's another side to the new Montauk Boys program, and that is now what they call the Jesus freaks, pardon the expression. But they're the ones who are going off the deep end of religion in the sense of the Christian orientation. Of course, the two are opposed, but they're both used, and they have their place. I do not know what the place is. And there's still the group in the middle, shall we say, midline America, the middle cross-section of society, totally not out of line, fitting the norm. And of course, there's still Montauk boys in that group and now Montauk girls. They are very unobvious because of the fact they fit into the mainstream of society. So much for the Montauk boys and the Montauk girls. It's an ongoing program. It's not fun. Nobody knows when, where, how they may strike next, or whether there may be some major operation in store for the future. To this date, I have not seen a massive operation. There was only one other I could report that was, to my mind, indicative of a massive Montauk Boys operation, and that was back some years ago, I believe around 88, 89, where on one night, large cities across the U.S. sprung up with fire simultaneously, from Los Angeles, not to New York City, but to many other cities, all the same night, riots and burning the city. And the police were hands off in Los Angeles. I do not know if that implied the same action in the other cities. They let it go for a period of time, and then they were told to close down on it. It was an orchestrated demonstration of something. Don't ask me what, other than it was obviously, to me, and to my understanding, Montauk Boys. Let's get off the subject of Montauk Boys and go into something else. Other aspects of the Montauk Project which were interesting was, of course, there was some genetic experimentation there. Not very much of it, but it was there and it was elsewhere. This is a side of the issue I don't really care to get into because I'm no expert in genetic manipulation and the attempts to crossbreed races. But there was some of it at Montauk. Much more was engaged in at Dulce, New Mexico, and other locations sponsored by the government. One of the other things they were doing, and of course this was the primary thrust of Montauk, other than the boys program, was the exploration of time and space, traveling forward and backwards in time, and of course across the galaxy. There was one program I became involved in, several I were involved in, but I will not go into more details on this one. They did use it for going back and altering history, but in this case, in the program I'm referring to, it was not a matter of altering history, it was a matter of determining history. Unbeknownst to the general public, but at least one person in the last few months has come forward to verify it, Mars has been colonized by humans for quite some years. It goes back to the period after the initial landing in 1962, an unmanned lander, sponsored by the U.S. and Russian governments jointly. And the history of that is available in a video entitled Alternative 3, which shows the result of a program broadcast in England on Anglia TV on April 1, 1977, detailing what they investigated as the brain drain in England. Well, they got into other subject matter and eventually became involved with the whole operation of Alternative 3, namely get off the planet in case the global warming goes totally out of control, and establish colonies elsewhere, Mars being one of them. According to my understanding, the info I have, I know at least one man has gone public on it, Mars is colonized, human colonies. A lot of the people who disappeared from Earth have gone to Mars. In the process of colonizing and building these domed cities, if they were all domed, they found evidence of underground installations totally sealed off. like obvious cavern entrance, but a concrete plug in it or some other type of structure which blocked it, and they didn't have earth-moving equipment up there heavy enough to break in. So they radioed back via NASA, or whatever means they used, and said, we have these strange things here. It looks like entrances to underground installations. We cannot get in. What are we going to do about it, or can you do something about it? So the word went to Montauk, and this was about 1981. There's something here we'd like you to look into. So the management says, okay, give us the coordinates of at least one, maybe several of these locations, in terms of latitude and longitude of Mars, and we'll look into it. So they got the coordinates, and of course the celestial mechanics and all of the celestial perturbations and everything else of the solar system were already plugged into this monster computer. I mean, all of the basic scientific knowledge they needed was in it. So they figured, well, we don't know whether there's a cavern system there or whether it's solid rock and this is just a bum lead. We'll send a camera up there, and if it winds up in solid rock, nothing's lost except the camera. So they got the coordinates, put it through the computers, and decided, go. They put the camera in the tunnel, send it out, and of course the way the tunnel works is it's a one-way type thing. You start at this end, put in object, whether it be a truck, a car, a camera, or a person or a group of people at the entrance point, move them up to it, and they're sucked through it like a vacuum cleaner was pulling them through. They're unharmed and uninjured. They go through this thing to the output end, wherever it has been determined it shall focus. So they sent the camera up to Mars, and it was on, and they got pictures. Of course, they brought it back. They were able to bring it back. And what they do is they reverse the polarity of this tunnel after some period of time, and whatever object is up there is brought back. Or if it's a person or a group there, they're told, be at the entrance point on reverse polarity if you want to come back, which of course everybody did essentially. Back comes the camera. They get pictures of an underground facility. Okay, we'll send a team up there. They did. Duncan and I went on this team more than once, and we were in the underground of Mars. We found a huge remnants of an underground civilization. No one was there. There's no evidence of life or anyone being alive there, quite contrary to some of the metaphysical reports we get from people whom I shall not comment on their veracity other than to say other people have other ideas, but we found nothing whatever to support the idea there was anyone left alive on Mars of the old civilization. Found all kinds of equipment. Everything was off. Tunnels went for miles. The explorations continued for quite some time, I think probably to the end of the time when Montauk was shut down. But after a number of these explorations, Duncan and I decided we were going to go on our own. The computer system was set up with all of the celestial data as well as the data from Mars, and as Mars moved in its orbit around the solar system, they could correct for this on an automatic basis. All we had to do is punch in the proper code number for the, quote, trip to Mars, unquote, and it would make automatic corrections for the date. And when the green light went on, it says it was safe to go and the tunnel was operational. We went on our own twice to explore the underground. We found a lot of interesting things. In fact, as I remember, Duncan even found one of the power systems for lighting was still operational. Don't ask me how. We never tracked that down as to where it came from. We saw a lot of things. A few things were brought back. And of course, these teams brought a lot of evidence back. It's all buried somewhere. Even some of the religious artifacts. There was religious artifacts. We didn't learn much about the people. That is Duncan and I. Maybe somebody else did. But on the return from our second trip, they were waiting for us. We were slapped on the wrist and told very bluntly, you're not to do this anymore. And they broke Duncan and I up as a team, so to speak, and we put in different sections and on different operations. It continued after that, but we never heard anything more about what they found. But in terms of the fact that is not publicly admitted today that there are colonies on Mars that are quite successful, I would suggest that you go find one of the books about to be published, if it hasn't been already, by Dr. George Merkel out of Corpus Christi, Texas, who announced this book at the last meeting of the Global Sciences Congress, which was in Houston, Texas, last month. He showed photos. I was not there, but he showed photos of life on Mars that totally, I would say, upset and also at the same time probably titillated the senses of the people who were absolutely amazed at what he had to show. I cannot vouch for the accuracy of his information, not having seen it. I do know George Merkel personally, and I know that he is a scientist of great repute, has done a great number of things. He originally came from Russia, but he worked for the CIA for many years as a scientist. He holds 4 PhDs. He is not a dummy. He knows what he's talking about, so far as I have seen in every case. At this point, let's take another break. In going through the history of the followed-up experiment and the Montauk Project, I've yet to explain how my memories of my involvement with both of those came back. The first one that came back was actually the Montauk Project. In 1985, I was at a national USP8 conference in Dayton, Ohio. Preston Nichols was there, and he brought a new assistant with him, Duncan Cameron. I did not know at that point who Duncan was, and I really didn't pay too much attention to it until he was involved with a lecture with Preston, a presentation on the stage. I sensed he was a very sensitive person, so I cornered him in the cafeteria the next day, and we sat and talked for about 2.5 hours. And about halfway through this conversation, I got the feeling quite strongly that I knew him from somewhere else. And I asked him, Duncan, do you feel like maybe you know me from somewhere? He said, yes. I said, you have an idea from where? He said, no. I said the same thing. I knew him from somewhere, I was quite sure of it, but I didn't know where from either. As the conference broke up, I had an invitation from Preston to come out and see him sometime in Long Island. Possibly I might want to work for him because he was looking for some good engineers. He not only was working a full-time job, but he was also working in his laboratory on various research projects. So this was July 1985. In August of 85, I went to see Preston and Duncan, intending to spend a weekend. I wound up staying 2 weeks. And in that particular period of time, Preston invited both of us to take a trip with him out to Montauk Point. It was at that time, of that visit, and a subsequent visit in 1986, May of 1986, when the group from Phoenix came in, headed by Lenny Perlstein, as I previously mentioned, that my memories literally came back. Not on the base